All right, everyone, welcome to the 1863 AAR for the spring campaign. I'm going to be hosting this. I'm Umpire Ryan. I'm here with Umpire Azunti, the Union CIC, some Confederate players, and we're going to be talking about the game. So, just to give a little background of how we got here, as this is not a historical game. We started in the Maryland campaign back in 1862, where the Confederates tried to advance into Maryland from Leesburg. They did not make it very far. One corps made it to Frederick, one corps captured Harper's Ferry. However, the Union snuck a corps behind them to get to Leesburg. The Confederates came south and east from Harper's Ferry to try to destroy this one force, and they got outflanked by the Union coming behind them. This resulted in the capture of Longstreet's corps, as well as the death of General Lee and the capture of Longstreet himself. Not going to get too deep into this part of the campaign, but it led to the Army of Northern Virginia being reduced in size by half, and loss of one of their more competent commanders moving into the fall campaign. So the Union did not initially make a move after the Maryland campaign to destroy the Army of Northern Virginia. There was hopes in the North that the Confederacy would surrender after such a disastrous defeat. However, coming into November-December timeframe, the Union decided that they would march down and capture Richmond to go and bring an end to the war once and for all. Now, the Confederates, seeing the position they were in, knew they had to attack, and General Beauregard was given command of the Army of Northern Virginia. General Beauregard initially had some plans to try to hold the Rappahannock from Fredericksburg up to Culpeper. However, they decided that that is exactly what the Union would be expecting, and instead, they would do a march north through the valley up to Harper's Ferry, and then from Harper's Ferry east to Washington, D.C. This caught the Union completely off guard, as no one in the Union suspected that the Confederates would be dumb enough to try to march through the valley in the winter to go and outflank the Union. Due to that, they only put one corps in the valley to make sure the valley was clear, and the rest of the Union was planning on running down to Culpeper and then from Culpeper to Richmond. Now, there was some defenders around Culpeper, a single corps of militia, and they held Rappahannock Station. McClellan saw this and was worried that the entire Army of Northern Virginia was here. So he consolidated the majority of the Army of Potomac in this region for about a week before he decided to push on to Culpeper. This gave Beauregard plenty of time to capture Harper's Ferry, and in doing so, captured two corps of Union, as it was Slocum's Corps as well as the 8th Corps from Maryland that came to assist. Those two corps ended up being captured, and Harper's Ferry fell. And down south, the Army of Potomac was stalled from advancing due to Stuart getting in the rear, and as you can see, tearing up miles and miles of rail. The Army of Potomac decided at this point that they had to fall back to Washington due to the majority of the Army of Northern Virginia being able to now march on Washington unopposed, as well as any attempts to move south being thwarted by their supply situation. At this point, both the armies settled into winter quarters, as the winter from 1862 to 1863 was extremely rough. And that brought us to the start of this campaign. We will now cover the winter quarters decisions. So the Army of the Potomac was garrisoned around D.C., Poolesville, and Leesburg. The Army of Northern Virginia had one corps in the valley that stayed the winter there. One corps stayed around the Culpeper area and Warrenton area, and the rest of the Army of Northern Virginia wintered in around Richmond, south of Richmond area. The armies at this time decided that both of them needed to go and expand their cavalry force. So you had what was in the prior games about a division worth of cavalry. Now both of them expand up to entire corps worth, as well as the Confederacy was able to negotiate back for a lot of their prisoners and were able to try to form more corps to their army. There was a lot of planning going on over the winter on what to do once spring came. And the Union, with how extensively their cavalry was defeated in the last games, made sure to make it a priority to expand their cavalry and make preparations for their spring campaign. This made it so that the Union was in their winter quarters longer than the Confederates. What ended up happening was the Confederates started movement 4 days earlier than the Union, allowing their cavalry forces to go and start marching up north and locate the Army of the Potomac before the Army of the Potomac even started moving. How we implemented this was we actually did a live session at the very, very beginning of this game where all the Confederate players were just giving movement orders to start their movement up north from Petersburg coming north, Richmond coming north, Culpeper and Warrenton moving north, in their cavalry divisions that were stationed around this area to start moving north and figure out where the Union lines were. Oh, what the? Oh, okay, I see what you're doing. We'll now go over the OOBs for each side. I guess I'll discuss this. The Confederacy last game was looking at a two-corps system with a third corps of militia. The militia was pretty utterly destroyed last game, but throughout the winter, with them being able to recruit heavily, as well as get a lot of those captured soldiers back that were on parole from the Maryland campaign, expanded their army extremely rapidly. So they entered this campaign with 4 corps. First Corps under General Jackson, Second Corps under General Magruder, Third Corps under General Longstreet, and Fourth Corps under General A.P. Hill. Now, the Cavalry Corps was made with a newly promoted Lieutenant General Stuart with 2 divisions, one being under F. Lee and one being under Hampton. Beauregard had command of the entire army. And if you want to go and take a look at the supply situation between the Union and Confederates, you can see how bad the Confederacy really had it. We got historical numbers of how many wagons each unit would have for the Army of Potomac and Army of Northern Virginia, and tried to go and figure out like the rail situation that they had. The Confederacy had a systemic problem with rails, as the majority of their rail lines down here were different gauges and just not a lot of trains. They ended up having to commandeer a lot of civilian trains, and then those trains couldn't move along the entire rail network easily. They'd have to change gauges before moving on farther track, giving the Confederacy a much more, we just modeled this with a much less number of trains that they could bring into the fight, compared to the Union having a ridiculous amount of trains that they could move supplies around pretty rapidly and troops around pretty rapidly. The Army of Potomac also grew in size over the winter. You had First Corps under Hooker, Second Corps under Hancock, Third Corps under Sedgwick, Fifth Corps under Meade, Sixth Corps under Smith, Ninth Corps under, this was
Reynolds.
Reynolds, yes. And then 11th Corps under Richardson. This was an interesting decision. This was the German Corps that was under, I'm trying to remember who it was last campaign. Anyway, it was a German Corps, mostly German volunteers that wanted to go and fight with their commander.
Stiegel.
Yeah, Siegel, yeah. So they end up having quite a bit of morale problems at the beginning of this campaign due to Siegel being sacked after his poor performance last campaign. And then Buford leading out the Cavalry Corps, which the Union Cavalry historically in these last couple of games have done pretty poorly. This is what took the Union Army longer to actually get out of winter quarters, was just organizing their cavalry into a effective fighting force. And then moving on to the NPC commands. This was not brought in too much. We had the Department of Washington that is responsible for guarding D.C., broken down into their actual brigade components. These would be stationed around the fort lines of D.C. itself. So you had 22nd Corps here, as well as 8th Corps, which garrisoned Maryland. The purposes of this is that if the Confederates did enter Maryland, there would be opposition to them entering it, given it wouldn't be too heavy opposition, as the 8th Corps was not Well, the Eighth Corps itself was a combat-ready force, but the majority of the middle department is fairly small and scattered. We will now move on to the Confederate planning, unless Azunti, do you have anything you wish to add to this?
No, that was quite thorough.
All right, cool. Um, Colonel Sandy Pendleton, if you would like to discuss what the Confederate planning was for this.
Certainly, certainly. So initially, the corps, as you heard previously, the corps were scattered all about. None were in real supporting range. A lot were isolated and at threat of being cut off. So the first decision that was made was to pull Magruder back from Harper's Ferry because he was very overextended and he was vulnerable from potential encirclement. The unfortunate thing about Magruder being falling back was a majority of Confederate supplies were actually held in the valley. So, in particular, Winchester. And as he was falling back, he was being hampered by a pretty active Union pursuit. And that led to Magruder detonating all the Winchester supplies as he fell back toward Front Royal. And in the center, where Jackson was located, he fortified around Warrenton, and General Beauregard ordered the other two corps who were off map to consolidate. A few days passed, I think it was 2 or 3, and Jackson and Beauregard got the itchy finger and decided to advance. We were hearing reports that the cavalry and Stuart and Hampton, you can correct me if I'm wrong, they were actively engaging in Union infantry all along the front. The cavalry, the Yankee cavalry, was being engaged multiple times. So we were hearing a pretty active skirmishing going on ahead. And the decision was to move up to Haymarket to be able to react to any type of Union advance south toward the Manassas area, while Magruder was falling back to Front Royal. As we were marching up to Haymarket, we stumbled upon an isolated Union Corps under, at the time,
Oh,
General Howard.
did you want to continue into that, or that's beyond
Real
planning?
quick,
Yeah.
let's just talk about like the initial planning of what your guys' initial planning was, which was, Magruder fall back and the rest of the corps come up to Jackson, and then like what your initial plan was after meeting Jackson.
It was to go on the offensive again. We were going to advance, I believe, to swing into the valley and take on the offensive again against the Union.
Yes. So another drawn out valley campaign. Um. Then Sedgwick, what was the Union plans for coming out of 1860, out of the winter quarters?
Okay, so I wasn't the CIC at the time. That was General Couch, but I believe that our biggest concern was another rebel advancement north into Maryland, and that was a big part of the reason why we've had essentially a significant portion of the army just positioned west of Washington, north of the Potomac, just to guard against such an advance. We split up into 3 different wings. We had Reynolds' wing, which was kind of the main force, Hancock sort of by himself to the north, and then a reserve by Washington itself in case the rebels tried to come directly at the capital. And the idea would be to have Hancock sort of counter the rebels in the valley again, and Reynolds would sort of guard this middle area, and then I would be deployed as needed with my wing, depending on what the rebels did. And that was pretty essentially the plan. It was very much a reactive plan, saying we will adapt to what the rebels do. We will at least challenge them in the valley, regardless, though.
All right. And if you have not really caught this so far, both the plans were very much we are going to wait and see what the other side does, which led to this game being very drawn out as no one really knew what to what was to happen next. Individual players ended up sitting around waiting for orders on what they were supposed to do, or exercising initiative, but not with the rest of the army. So you saw a lot of people end up getting either isolated or sitting around just waiting for orders due to there not being a very large cohesive overall plan going into this. So I've broken down this game into 6 different phases on what ended up happening through this, so we're not going through each individual turn on what happened. Um, we can get a. I'm going to end up loading up another map. Apologies for everyone that is loaded in. We will do this one right here. Bear with me, Tabletop Simulator does not like loading up the massive amount of tokens that we have on the map. Alright, this is the starting positions that everyone had at the beginning of the campaign. As you can see, everyone was deployed, pretty much ready to go and march out. You had Beauregard with Jackson stationed around Warrenton, Magruder in the valley moving up towards Harper's Ferry. And during the live session, this is where the cavalry began its sweep out. So Stuart decided to go and start his raid, heading up towards Washington, D.C. He ended up taking a route from Culpeper, then straight up the Potomac River, while F. Lee started in Front Royal and made his way east and then north towards Leesburg. We made a determination that when forces got approximately 8 miles apart, we would go and stop all movement to allow the Union to react to the Confederates' advance. So at this point is when we actually started the turns of the games instead of just doing the live session, which did help out as we knocked out multiple turns instead of there just being everyone waiting on turns and marching and nothing happening, especially for Longstreet that started down in Petersburg and A.P. Hill who started down in Richmond. I can't even imagine how boring it would have been for them just to march all this way from Petersburg just to get here if we did this in a play-by-post scenario. But after this, it went to consistently play-by-post instead of live. So the live session really was majority cavalry movement and the infantry moving up towards Jackson, to where we now have F. Lee at Aldie and Stuart approaching Washington, D.C. Stuart then began his raid. We'll go and talk about this. Stuart's raid. This was probably one of the most influential parts of the game. Stuart left his positions here, came towards Washington and saw the defenses, and then began his movement west, tearing up rail lines, infrastructure, telegraph lines, anything that he could find, as F. Lee advanced up to Goose Creek and took up defensive positions here. The cavalry being present kind of freaked out the Union immediately, and Couch ordered both Sedgwick and Richardson to drive off Stuart, which I'm not sure if you guys know this, infantry march slower than cavalry are able to move on horse. So trying to catch a horseman with infantry, not necessarily the best scenario. So the infantry end up marching up and down, trying to go and catch Stuart, or at least defend him from crossing the Potomac and getting into their rear to destroy even more. At the same time, Reynolds was now made aware of the cavalry holding Goose Creek and was determined to go and drive him off of that line. That brings
Can I
us
add one thing?
Yes.
Couch also did order Buford to counter Stuart. However, Buford was single-minded in his desire to find the rebel army, so did not actually counteract Stuart at all, because he was too busy trying to find the rebel forces. He did not know that most of the rebel forces simply weren't around. The Confederate cavalry were much further forward than their infantry counterparts. So while that could be of sound decision making, it ended up being a detriment because it allowed Stuart to move unimpeded
Another big thing of that is since there were so many turns of Buford trying to go and find the rebel army and them coming up empty-handed, this fed Reynolds and Buford and some other officers to be under the complete impression that the entire Army of Northern Virginia must be in the valley if they're not here. Which goes and leads to another interesting scenario later on, where the majority of the Army of Potomac starts marching into the valley to counteract the Army of Northern Virginia, while the Army of Northern Virginia there is retreating. So we'll move forward. I think this is going to be about when everything starts hitting for the cavalry raid. Again, bear with me. Tabletop Simulator, not the best. So Stuart continues on destroying everything, and as you can see, everyone's coming out to go and try to drive him off. As well as, at this point, the Union is still coming up. They're trying to do some like outflanking maneuvers to go and drive Lee away from his positions at Goose Creek and south. And again, at this time, the majority of the Army of Northern Virginia is still scattered across the countryside of Virginia. Not actually, anywhere where they can engage the Army of the Potomac. Now, this cat and mouse between cavalry continue for quite a few turns before more interesting developments occur. Again, bear with me, Tabletop Simulator. So finally, they're able to drive Lee off of Goose Creek and push him south. And Azunti, you want to speak on Hooker's decision-making here?
Yeah, so Hooker's decision-making wasn't specific to Hooker. As we previously discussed, the Union's ideas were to remain fairly passive until they could locate the full Confederate army and then move to their position and oppose them. This led to high command, this being the most of the wing commanders, Couch, being fairly passive and conservative in their movements. There were three commanders in particular that got very impatient with this. Hooker was one of them. Smith and Meade also were pretty impatient. You can see that up here, just adjacent to the valley, is where Smith and Meade were positioned. They waited there for, I think, 2 full days before they decided they were going to move again on their own. Hooker waited less. And unfortunately for Hooker, Hooker moved kind of into the maw of the enemy. Hooker's entire plan was he was going to, since he also believed, everybody believed, to my knowledge, believed that the rebel forces were in the valley. So Hooker's plan was, well, we at the very least, we don't see them here. We're going to sneak down to Fredericksburg, and then from Fredericksburg, we're going to go to Richmond, and we're going to win the war. Now, I think we can all agree, and I think Hooker even later admitted, that wasn't the greatest idea. But unfortunately for him, the timing of things didn't work out for him. So when he got to about the Bull Run area, Reynolds, his wing commander, found out about this and rushed south from his position right next to Leesburg to go see Hooker. And he ordered his arrest. Well, he had that right. So Hooker was arrested. The person who was next in command was Howard. We treated this just like a main commander would be wounded. They would be replaced by their 2IC. So Howard, his 2IC, became Howard and took command. Reynolds then left immediately. He went over to the valley. He wanted to check up on Meade and Smith, who had also been moving on their own, although he was pleased with them because they moved into the valley. This meant that First Corps all of a sudden had this huge command and control issue while they were in this exposed position. They were down their commander. The wing commander didn't stay local to help coordinate things, and in general there was a lot of chaos. This did actually take about a half day to sort out, and unfortunately during that half day it just so happened to be that despite being passive for a good week, this is right when Jackson got the itch himself and decided to advance roughly exactly where Howard was.
I would like to add that during this time, what went and made Reynolds even more certain that the Army of Northern Virginia was here was that this was the first time that anyone had got eyes on any Confederate infantry at all. Also, little side note here, Magruder's troops are blue. Harper's Ferry was a depot town, and at the time of last year when it was captured, his troops staying in the valley, there was a ton of Union uniforms in Harper's Ferry. And the Confederate Army being so low on supply, they ended up taking a lot of the coats and shoes and everything else, making them fairly well equipped. Oddly enough, in blue uniforms, so, there was Union insignia removed and everything else, but their jackets and their pants and everything else about them was blue. So it did make this interesting thing where players were running into blue troops with Confederate flags. And it was very confusing for a large part of the game whenever anyone encountered these. But DeCesnola ran into Confederate infantry in the valley. This being the first time any Confederate infantry was spotted, it made everyone more certain that this is where the Army of Northern Virginia was. And very shortly after this, the people that could come to Hooker's aid and help him out were up here at Gum Springs. Stuart, realizing how bad a position he was in, that infantry was chasing him from the east, he couldn't cross to the north, and he's running now into infantry to the west, decided to retreat back south and ran into Buford and Gregg, and they had a running cavalry battle around Gum Springs, Pleasant Valley, Cub Run, multiple battles back to back to back. Stuart was actually injured in this fight, and shortly after, Buford himself fell, which is another kind of comical error made. Let me advance up to when that happens. This is turn 10, I believe, so we need to go up to turn 11.
Reynolds did leave his 2IC to basically watch over Howard. That was Nagel. The idea is that Nagel would then keep Howard in line, make sure he retreated out of the area, and report back to Reynolds if any foul play was afoot, so Reynolds could come back down and solve it as needed. Howard did have an opportunity, which I thought was fairly interesting, to retreat. It was like the evening turn, I believe, into night. They had started to see the rebel cavalry had started under Lee had started forming a screen. They could see clouds of infantry. They couldn't really tell what it was or how much it was, but they knew it was coming. Oop.
Here, I'm moving up to where you're actually talking about.
Gotcha. So they had an opportunity to leave. However, Nagel did a 180 and decided that they wanted glory just as much as Howard wanted. So they actually stayed, thinking that the Union cavalry's nearby, they're going to come and assist. They're going to let the rest of people know we're going to have a stand, and we'll actually follow in Hooker's footsteps. Hooker wanted to be aggressive. We're going to drag the rest of the army into this battle. Unfortunately for them, they didn't realize that the Union cavalry, one, didn't like them, and two, was really fought out from the Battle of Cub Run. They had managed to finally defeat Stuart, but it came at a huge loss, including the loss of Buford's life, which had also created a little bit of command confusion, where both Averill and Gregg were promoted until they were able to solve that issue. So what ended up happening is First Corps ended up being completely isolated here in the vicinity of Bull Run, with very little support, while Jackson's first Confederate Corps descended on him, supported by the entire rebel cavalry corps.
Yes. And on this note, I do want to point out one player in this whole thing, F. Lee, Chief. This entire time, he was being pressed by Averell coming down south at him. Before Stuart got over here, Buford and Gregg were pushing south on him, and Hooker. And he did an amazing delaying action from Goose Creek to Aldie and then down the mountains, holding them all at bay until Stuart came and started distracting the rest of the cavalry, and Averell sitting over here. His actions here single-handedly kept the Union from discovering that there were no Confederates down here. So that there was that opening, as well as that Jackson's Corps was here to begin with. It was actually really, really impressive to go and see this, and probably the MVP on the Confederate side, I would go and say, hands down. With a single cavalry division, he held off all of this. Moving back to Bull Run, though, we get to this battle here, which I need to advance some more to get to the battle, which we also took some interesting liberties when it came to running the battle itself. We almost ran it as a tactical battle, kind of. As soon as this loads, you guys will see. Anyone who was not here for the battle, you'll finally be able to see what I am talking about here. Hold on, I need to advance some more. I thought this was going to be it.
See if I can figure out the exact module. It's April 9th, real time, which is turn 16, I believe.
I'm pulling up turn 17, so this will
17 is
have
gonna.
it.
Yeah.
Which we had to again remake all the OOBs from the reports that you guys were getting, like the returns, and then go and place it on the map over here, which we ended up with this absolute mess. So we took the area around here on where the troops were stationed during the fighting, which Jackson did a night attack into Howard's line, approaching them at the night and absolutely just smacking them with overwhelming artillery and infantry support pushing up on them. As during this exact same time, Hampton was approaching from the north and Lee was already there. Again, night marching into the battle. So you had Lee taking up positions behind them, harassing their lines, and now coming in to capture the wagons, as well as now Jackson's side pushing in and starting to envelop some of the Union positions around here. This kept getting worse and worse for them. Nagel decided to go and stay over here and try to rally the troops, which ended up in his death, and them eventually getting pushed back to this area here where they did kind of a final stand. There was attempts to break them out. The cavalry, which was now under Averell, as well as Sedgwick, Reynolds, and Couch, pushed down south with Sickles' division to try to go and break the First Corps out of this situation. They did arrive too late, though, as they were only able to break out a couple brigades worth of men, very depleted brigades worth of men, to get across Dudley Springs and retreat north. But for the majority of it, First Corps was completely surrounded and then captured or killed, including Howard being captured, Nagel being killed. Zunti, you have anything to add to this?
No, I could go into more detail of the battle if you wanted, but
Sure.
For higher level, sure. I tried to erase these lines here, but I'm having trouble. So I'm just gonna draw right on top of it.
Here, let me erase all draw lines. Come on. There we go.
All right. So I actually copied the map over so you can see a little bit more if you scroll up. Yep, perfect. So the Union had deployed kind of along these. Oh, why can't I draw here? I can't draw on this map though. For some reason, what if I lock it? There we go. If I lock it, it's fine. The Union had deployed facing west for the most part, with their on the high ground of Sudley Mountain, as well as over here on I believe this is called Stuart's Heights. I'd have to go look at that. It's in our battles. But the Confederates had actually come in a little bit more from the southeast. So they ended up really enveloping these heights right here and only a little bit against Stuart Mountain. And so what ended up happening is as the battle developed, most of the Union's elite units kind of got stuck here and had to kind of be piecemeal attacked and surrendered, while what remained tried to coalesce on the Battery Heights as well as the Stony Ridge and Sudley Mountain, forming this weird, like, big U shape, basically. Oop, my mouse freaked out there. They form this big U shape here, like this. Now, they weren't facing a whole lot of difficulty from this end because this was mostly cavalry, but it kept them pinned. The Union was able to kind of do a little bit of a counterattack right about here, but ultimately, yeah, their line eventually shattered with a concentrated effort in the afternoon by the Confederates. It was only at that time that the reinforcements, which were the both cavalry divisions of Gregg and Kilpatrick, as well as the division of Sickles under Sedgwick, coming and taking over this area from Wade Hampton, that those two brigades were able to get out at all.
And those brigades that were really mauled were like the elite of the elite. It was the Black Cats. It was the Iron Brigade. It was what's that third one? It was the Minnesota brigades that were part of their division over here.
Bucktails.
Yeah, the Bucktails that were pretty much like overran pretty instantly by the who is this? Walker's division and Hill's division coming in.
D.H. Hill, yeah. Now, D.H. Hill did bleed quite a bit for it. D.H. Hill, I think, had the highest casualties on the Confederate side during the battle. But yeah, what an interesting thing about this battle is the elite units ended up suffering the most. Like the Iron Brigade was the first brigade to break in the entire battle. The Stonewall Brigade was actually also pushed back in that Union counterattack. The Black Hats were killed. I think they had like 50 to 80% casualties. The rest captured. It was devastating for the elite brigades in this battle.
And really, Jackson's corps did not take too well after this. He suffered tremendous casualties in doing this. It was a Confederate victory, but it came at very, very high cost. The only luck that they had out of this was towards the end of this battle, they now finally had A.P. Hill arriving in the area with Longstreet not far behind. So the rest of the Confederate Army was finally arriving to go and support them at the end of this battle. A.P. Hill's division, like his leading division, was arriving around Gainesville, I believe, at the end of the day, but by then fighting had ended.
Mm-hmm.
This went and gave the Confederates a good, strong control of the center right here. And if you look at the Union positions up north, at this point, this is when the Union fully committed to entering the valley. And they got in here, walked around for a bit, and realized there's nothing here. No one is here. And DeCesnola was now sending reports back, being like, hey guys, they're down here. And, they finally realized the situation they were in. The Army of Northern Virginia is not here. it's in the east, and we need to start moving back. So the Confederates had a really, really good position at this point. Between them
Mhm.
and DC were only the 22nd Corps, and to the north was only really 2 corps, which was the reserve, standing in the way of Leesburg or breaking out into Maryland.
This is actually probably the low point for the Union. There's another point that isn't great, but with 3 corps in the valley next to nothing, the Union forces in this area completely deconcentrated, and these aren't like the corps are really mixed up here because a lot of the forces have been marching to the sound of battle, just kind of as divisions, and so there was a lot of confusion there. And the Confederate, all 3 corps outside of Magruder's are all in this finely concentrated area. So we were thinking things were looking very poorly for the Union at this juncture, with an entire corps effectively destroyed as well.
And that was one of the more elite corps that the Union had.
With the other 2 in the valley, way away from anything important.
Yeah, we're gonna move up to the aftermath of this now. So this is now phase 1 and phase 2. So you had the cavalry raid that ended up in like these long-running cavalry battles between Stuart and Buford that eventually led to Buford's death and the cavalry having to reorganize again mid-campaign. Now we got to the third battle of Bull Run, and now we're moving on to kind of like the disaster point of where the Union finally realized how bad a position they were actually in. This is the breakout. I need to move forward a little bit farther than this. But where is it? We'll move up to 21. Oh, Zunti, real quick, you want to talk about the side quest Hooker was going through during this whole thing?
Sure, I absolutely can. So, Hooker, as we discussed, was arrested and then sent to D.C. Reynolds then took off for the Valley, and then after the Valley, came down to try to salvage First Corps, and so. And Couch was only kind of vaguely aware of these things because reporting wasn't great between Couch, who sat away from the front for most of the entire campaign. So as a result, everybody kind of just lost track of Hooker in the shuffle. So he just kind of shows up at Washington, D.C. Meanwhile, the people in Washington, D.C. can hear the Battle of Third Bull Run happening, but aren't getting reports from Couch or anyone about it. So there's a lot of panic and trying to figure out what's going on. Meanwhile, Hooker is meeting with Ben Wade and his other allies in Washington City, just basically trying to make a case for himself to return to the army. He wasn't successful in that necessarily, but what he was successful in is eventually Stanton, Secretary of War, said enough is enough. The rebel army has shown up on the doorstep of D.C. because at this point, rebel cavalry had reached as far further, I believe, than Fairfax Courthouse, and captured some engineer units even. And he had no idea where the Union Army even was. So he said, Hooker, I'm sending you tonight as effectively a courier. You have my jurisdiction. I'm taking you off of arrest. You're going to work for me, and you're going to find out where the Union Army is, and you're going to bring it to the defense of D.C. because all I know is 20 miles from the Capitol, we could hear cannonry that was never explained, and there appears to be no Union infantry outside of the garrison of D.C. between here and the rebel army. Effectively means Washington's undefended. We don't know what size of the rebel army is there. We don't know where the Union army is. Go save, go get the army and bring it here. So Hooker went on his little quest. He traveled west along the Leesburg Turnpike, eventually finding Couch around Leesburg, which is where they were consolidating their army. You can see that their forces are all kind of heading north into Leesburg. There are a number of people who did not like this. I didn't go into this in too much detail earlier, but Hooker was a very divisive figure in the army at this point. There was a few parts in other parts of the campaign where Couch and a few other people didn't like the decisions he'd made, not only in this leg of this campaign, but in previous campaigns. So his arrival at the behest of Stanton actually had a lot of political ramifications with two players leaving the game effectively. Go ahead.
Yeah, with that, so we did have two players leave. It was Reynolds and Couch. They left over to political ramifications of this. However, for the story and lore of the game, Couch, historically, he was offered command of the Army of Potomac, but declined because of health reasons. During this whole campaign, we were giving him reports of like how bad his health is. So we're going with this fact that Hooker arrived over here, and then Couch ended up giving up command of the army due to his health issues that he's been having. He had very chronic stomach problems from his time in Mexico during the Mexican-American War, and it's like plagued him for the rest of his life. Reynolds, who he kind of made some very interesting decisions throughout this. On the march back from the defeat at Third Bull Run, he had the stragglers of First Corps with him, which, where are they actually? Here. Rally. He had stragglers of them with his corps. And they had just fought from the morning, they were woken up in the middle of the night and attacked. They fought from the morning all the way to the end of the day when they finally broke out, and then force marched north. And he ordered that any stragglers were to be shot. And due to that, we went and had him get arrested himself after all of this, to as in there like a provost marshal. Everyone witnessed this. It was still murder in the army at this time. A senior officer couldn't just go up and shoot someone for straggling. There was laws, and you had to be a court martial for that to happen. You can't just go up and shoot someone. So he was arrested, and that was what led to his removal, at least lore-wise, in the game. The other side quest we kind of had is over in the valley still. The Union did eventually, D.C. Snow got word to these guys that there are Confederate infantry down here. And Magruder set up in very strong positions here defending Front Royal. He could have probably held this out for the entire game if it wasn't for the fact that earlier, when Averell came down here, he destroyed the rail station here and the train tracks. So there was no way to get any supplies up in the Front Royal. As well as Front Royal didn't have a lot of supplies in it. All their supplies were in Winchester that they blew up. So they started to starve here. They had no food. They were running low on ammunition. They were not able to go and hold these lines as two corps were approaching. It was not their positions that were bad. It was the fact that there was nothing here to eat. And now we come back to the main show. As you can see, the rest of the army has finally came up and is gathering around the now battlefield of Third Bull Run. The cavalry has been sent out east to find if there's anything out east, and Jackson is starting to slowly push north as the Union Army is retreating north. A.P. Hill's Corps has arrived at Groveton, and they shortly will be pushing over the Stone Bridge to Centerville and on towards D.C., as his orders were to go and set up over here, lead the army out, and the rest would follow. And Longstreet was now coming up behind to support them both. Now, this did turn into some confusion. The cavalry ended up pushing north to go and occupy this area to go and try to contain the Army of Potomac. Jackson pushed north, and Longstreet ended up coming along beside him north, as A.P. Hill was given the orders to approach D.C. The confusion that came out of this is the Union all of a sudden started getting into one long column to head back to D.C. once Hooker arrived and told them, hey, you guys need to get back towards D.C. The Confederates are advancing on it, which they were. AP Hill was advancing on DC with what he thought the rest of the Army of Northern Virginia behind him. Beauregard saw this and was kind of divided on what to do, if he goes and attacks north and attacks the Army of Potomac here while this spread out, or to advance on DC, or what to do. But at this moment, he got word from Magruder of how bad his situation was, that he had to withdraw, and he was being pursued by 2 corps. This made Beauregard think that he could go and push west, destroy these 2 corps, as well as rescue Magruder in one move. So he gave the order for Jackson to push west through Aldie and then down to assist Magruder. Longstreet would come to Warrenton and then back up, and AP Hill was supposed to start moving back west as well. However, no one told AP Hill. There were discussions in their co-locations that, hey, someone should probably let him know, but no one actually sent him a dispatch to be like, hey, come west. So while the rest of the Army of Northern Virginia started their movement to the west to assist Magruder retreating out of the valley, AP Hill continued his march towards DC. Zunti, did I skip over anything there?
No.
No, alright, we will advance up a little bit more. Let's see.
Oh, the depot at Leesburg was burned. That's one
Yes.
thing.
As the Army of the Potomac was evacuating Leesburg to head back towards Washington, they decided to burn the depot at Leesburg. We had a little bit of fun with this. They stacked all the hay bales and fodder and whatever else they had at the ignore the large Hampton that they had at Leesburg into a effigy of a man, and then burned it, having the first Burning Man occur in 1863. So this is where the Army is now. You had Richardson finally arriving in D.C. to support it, and AP Hill is actually at Freedom Hill. So at this point, now the Confederate Army is about 7 miles away from D.C., and you can see how the rest of the Army is scattered about over to the west. No one has communications with AP Hill at this point. And this is where they decided that they're going to go west. As you can see, Magruder is, as quickly as he can, evacuating the valley with 2 corps hot on his tail. And the Army of Northern Virginia was concentrated at this point, as you can see. You had all of them, like pretty much the majority of the army right here. It was a very controversial decision to go and send everyone west, especially through different routes. As Jackson went this way, Longstreet went this way, and you had Magruder over here. The army was immediately decentralized from its one position that it held, and they were kind of just scattered to the wind on this movement west. And it left AP Hill completely isolated over here. Also, at this point, since we thought the Confederates were going to be approaching D.C., we did go and put in here all the defenses around D.C. And honestly, it is kind of impressive to go look at everything the U.S. does have here, as well as all the defenses in Maryland, in case they decided to go that route. Stuart, at this point, was playing with the idea of still trying to somehow get across the Potomac, raid into the east, and even possibly burn down Baltimore. That never panned out. He was too busy dealing with other things, especially pulling AP Hill out of the fire once this happens over here. But this is the situation on where we had coming out of the Third Battle Bull Run, and now everyone running back east. There was a big change in command, though, at this point. As Couch stepped down, it was decided that Sedgwick would take command of the army, and that puts Sickles in charge of his corps. So Sickles now stepped up into command as the commander of 3rd Corps, as everything else was going on. Advance some more. Get up to the actual battle where Dan Sickles comes out. Which, if you guys don't know, like, the history of Daniel Sickles, I highly suggest you guys look it up. Daniel Sickles was a crazy, crazy guy. The man is a legend. I'll just say that. All right. So the Union Army, as they were coming to DC, realized that they had a Confederate force here, and turned to engage it. Which this engagement was absolutely insane. Sickles was coming down the road, and they realized that they had the Confederates here, and he was at Kenmore. He ordered his men to come through the forest to Hunter's Mill Station, where he smashed into A.P. Hill's corps. So,
On a forced march.
yeah, on a forced march, as more forces were coming through this way and this way. So A.P. Hill had forces approaching from his east, from his west, and then a very angry Dan Sickles just appearing out of the wood line in front of him. Now, obviously, A.P. Hill, facing 3 corps from the Union, could not go and hold this line, and started a retreat down, difficult run to Ox Hill, and trying to make it back to where he thought the rest of the Confederate Army was. He was starting to realize at this point, though, that he was completely isolated. He did not know where the Confederate Army went. No one told him. And he was very much at this point panicking and trying to find out where everyone was to get back to them, as this was a pretty dire situation for him to be in. Just the amount of forces coming against him. Also, at this point, Reynolds was finally arrested, and Burns took command of his corps, another new player. We had quite a bit of commanders coming and going in this game. But this is the massive line of Union troops retreating to D.C. to garrison it, for the entire Army of Northern Virginia to turn west and get decentralized once again. Apologies. As we get later in the game, it's going to be slower and slower loading because the amount of tokens that are on the map, as well as everything else. So A.P. Hill finally turns and fights around Chantilly. He realizes that he's getting overran here, and he has to turn around and fight. Now, at this point, though, he had made contact with Stuart, and Beauregard could hear the fighting of the battle, so he sent 2 divisions from Longstreet to go and assist with what was going on over here. They started to arrive, but A.P. Hill went and led his men into combat to try to save Pender's division as they were about to get surrounded, and he himself ended up getting shot and falling in battle. Now, he's not dead. He was just wounded in this battle, but he ended up falling in battle, and Rhodes took command of his corps. At this point as well, Stuart came east to go and find out what was going on himself, and ran into this mess of multiple corps pushing A.P. Hill. And Stuart kind of took command of Hill's corps at this time, as Rhodes was still trying to figure out what to do, and ordered them all back to Centerville, doing this fighting retreat to get out of there. And eventually they were able to get Pender's division out of this situation. Pender's division being A.P. Hill's old division, which was another very elite force that took extremely high losses, which is kind of common throughout this campaign, that a lot of these elite forces that each side had took some pretty heavy casualties in the fighting.
One thing I wanted to point out here is Jackson in his march west, you can see he's as far as Rector's Crossroads and 5 points at this point, had left his baggage around gum strings, not realizing how close the Union Army was to that. And so there was a really interesting moment where Stuart was like, okay, we got to get those wagons out of the way, and ordered them south. And then, I think the next day, Jackson was like, where's all of our supply? Why are we out of supply? It's because his wagons had been ordered elsewhere because they were in a dangerous position.
Yeah, Stuart did save his baggage, because there were, the very next turn, the Union cavalry turned to try to chase him down and weren't able to capture them. But Stuart ordering them south is the only thing that kept them safe, even though Jackson for the rest of the campaign was like that general going in like his reason that we're out of supply, blah blah blah, was just like laying into him about it. But he's the only reason that his baggage survived, that he could even resupply. But with that said, Jackson is now advancing to assist Magruder, and is about to run straight into Hancock, not realizing Hancock is here. Hancock came through the valley and then came north as they were trying to relink up with the rest of the Army of Potomac at this point. They were told to go to Leesburg and then get on trains and such to go and relink up with the Army, not realizing what was going on over here. Same thing with Smith. Smith gave up the chase of Magruder and started to head north as well, as they were going to try to come through here and relink up. And at this point, they were on a collision course to run straight into Jackson's Corps. Now, keep in mind, a couple days before, Jackson's Corps had been in heavy fighting. They used up a lot of their supply, and their supply got left behind over here. And then Longstreet is trying to get his men out of here to head down to Warrenton. So now you had the army divided into 3 separate locations of Jackson over here on one side of the mountains, Longstreet down here moving south, and A.P. Hill over here fighting for his life. And now Magruder isolated over here, just trying to go and get his men to like fed and supplied as they were out of supplies. They were able to get some wagons that the quartermaster sent over to resupply, and like their men just tore into it. And this leads us up to the next battle, the Battle of Goose Creek. Well, really, Battle of Goose Creek and Little River, as this was kind of like one big battle that took place over this entire area.
Yeah, right here.
And then this other battle over here to, what is this now, third Battle of Chantilly?
This was second Chantilly here.
So A.P. Hill starts his withdrawal back, gets to Centerville, and the Union Army made the most interesting decision I have ever seen here. They had A.P. Hill's corps on the ropes, and instead of pushing past this, the Union just held position. Burns, Sickles also got injured in this. He had his leg shot off by a cannon, so Birney takes command of his corps after this. And Richardson just sit around this area up here, not really moving or advancing on the Confederates. While the Confederates were in a pretty dire situation sitting around here around Centerville. Let me get that loaded.
The reason they didn't attack is they thought the rest of the rebel army was right behind and that it was a trap. And that attacking into their prepared positions was just going to lead to a counterattack, in which they would lose that battle.
So the Confederates set up defenses around Centerville as you can, and the Union also set up basically at their old positions from the day before, and sitting waiting for the rest of the Confederate army to arrive, which it wasn't coming. The only reason that they didn't extricate themselves from the situation immediately is because of how tired the men were. They were worried that if they tried to move them at all, straggling would basically make these divisions disappear immediately. Like, they just disintegrate. Which, they weren't wrong. It was a pretty desperate situation for them to be in. And with Longstreet heading west, and Jackson now drawing up for battle himself against Hancock, they were really isolated. It wasn't long after this, though. Longstreet was ordered to head east. After being told to head west, he was ordered east again to try to take command of this situation with his 2 divisions. And this is kind of the frustrating thing about the Confederate command, is that they kept getting orders to go back and forth. This happened on both sides, where people would be going one direction, told to turn around and go another direction, and it happened just again and again and again. So Longstreet was told to go east after this to go and help out A.P. Hill before Beauregard found out that Jackson was about to be fighting a major battle to the north. Now, Jackson thought that he was only facing one corps up here, that he didn't realize about the other corps down here, or even De Cesno's cavalry operating in the area. He only knew about Hancock. and he thought he could sweep Hancock from the field fairly easily. Um, what he didn't realize was that these two corps that he was facing were some of the largest corps in the Union Army, as well as some of the most veteran corps in the Union Army. It was not just going to be an easy cakewalk as everyone figured it would be.
One interesting thing about that is that there was a Confederate 2IC, I believe it was Pendleton, was fairly accurate with most of his predictions. But one thing that he got really wrong is he labeled one of these two veteran corps as completely green, and they were not only not green, they were veteran. So they definitely underestimated what they were up against.
Now, that did not go and stop them from making some very, very interesting decisions, especially Smith's corps later on after this. And De
Mhm.
Cesnola, they made some very, very interesting decisions after this that kind of turned that out to be a win for the Confederates. The Confederates came really close to like losing this whole situation over here to the west, and I'm not sure how many of them realized how bad a situation they're actually sitting in. Now, at this point, also the Confederate cavalry was scattered again. You had Effley at Aldie and Hampton down here at Thoroughfare Gap, and they were going to reconcentrate to go and assist A.P. Hill. And this leads to another major engagement later on. If we go and get up to that turn, let's do a turn 33. Skip ahead a little bit. Now we are approaching towards the end of the game. So Jackson fought a little battle over here against Hancock around Goose Creek, and he was able to like not do a whole lot against them. They pushed across the creek and drove them back a little bit. However, they quickly realized how bad their supply situation was, and they didn't have the ammunition to continue fighting. So Jackson started making withdrawal to go and try to get to some supply to actually get his men ammunition so they could continue fighting. And De Cesnola at this time came around their rear and was really threatening their supply at this point as well. Smith finally found out about the battle happening up here and was coming on Jackson's flank. And Beauregard finally was understanding what was going on to the west and ordered Magruder to come up to support Jackson. Now, at the same time, Longstreet again was pushing to pushing over here to support Rhodes and get him extricated from this. But again, the Union didn't push them. They sat here, they let the Confederates reorganize, and then eventually fall back across Bull Run to a way better defensive position that they had, as well as the Confederate cavalry was starting to combine again over here to make their corps one formation.
While the Union cavalry, I want to point out a kind of important thing here. The Union cavalry was 2nd Division here, 1st Division here, but the 1st Division was redeployed to the other end, and the gap was not filled. So then the 2nd Union Cavalry Division was completely isolated from the rest of the army with no real ability to be supported properly, right as the Confederate cavalry was instead concentrated. Ryan, are you muted?
Yes, I am muted. My bad. I would like to point out that the Union Cavalry acted pretty much as a two-division corps the entire game, even though they had 3 divisions, as their 3rd division spent the entire game in the valley with De Cesnola chasing after Magruder. And then when he did come out, he stayed on the western side of the mountains with Hancock and Smith. So the Union Cavalry was not able to go and use their full forces against Stuart. we'll move ahead a little bit as this turns into a pretty pivotal part of the game as well. Um, we'll skip past this. Sedgwick did have a meeting with like High Command where they did confirm him as like the leader of the Army of Potomac, and discussed like what they would want to see out of the army, but like that doesn't need to be brought up into the AARs. That will affect some other things. So everything loads. Oh, also, Confederate High Command was getting annoyed with Beauregard on his lack of communication. Um, they did send him a letter going and being like, "What is going on?" And in that letter, they asked if Stuart had died. Now, that was because Stuart was wounded earlier, and there were some rumors circulating around Richmond of Stuart's death, but that did end up being prophetic, as Stuart later on gathers his whole men together and charges Kilpatrick up here. The Battle of Gum Springs was pretty brutal. Kilpatrick fought them around Gum Springs, Pleasant Valley, was driven back, and Kilpatrick was trying to retreat out of this position, realizing how bad it was. But Stuart did not let him even gather to retreat. Hampton did a forced march attack straight into Kilpatrick's lines on the east side, as well as F. Lee coming on the west to go and outflank Kilpatrick, and the losses in this were pretty staggering. Almost all of the Second Cavalry Division, all the Second Cavalry Division was broken in this and scattered to the wind. But Kilpatrick himself was lost, and casualties were really high for the Confederates, for the Union, but the Confederates as well. This entire game, they had been running back and forth across all Northern Virginia. They have really ridden their horses into the dirt and exhausted their cavalrymen, their horses, and everything else in this battle. Yeah, this is like approximately how Stuart's been riding all over the place. And
That would, yeah.
This was like the last hurrah for the Confederate cavalry, and it ended with honestly a pretty sad moment where Stuart decided to lead his men forward in the battle and was shot by a Union sharpshooter during this endeavor, which Stuart is honestly probably one of the most influential players we had on this during this entire game. Him and Hooker are the only two players, I guess also Jackson, that have been here since the beginning and during the Maryland campaign. They had a massive impact on the game, and for him to die was honestly a really touching moment. That we kept saying this during the entire resolution every single time. Like we keep saying like he can't keep getting away with this because his exploits were legendary on what he was able to pull off. But this last battle here, he wasn't able to go and pull it off, and he ended up falling in battle.
This is also a pretty good screen cap of what's going on in the other theaters. You can see the Confederates are starting to fall back from Centerville across Bull Run, where they'll have a much stronger defensive place. This is right as Gregg is attempting to exploit the line. He fails to do so mostly because he gets called back by his high command. And then over here in the west, we have a really interesting situation. Now, Jackson had fallen back kind of in two directions. Partially so the Confederates often stole supplies from one another. F. Lee's wagons were up here, and he resupplied there. But he kind of ended up splitting his force, and Hancock realized this, which leads into the beginning of the Battle of Little River, where Hancock decides to descend on this side, while Smith descends on this side. What's interesting is they knew Magruder was down here. They had reports of it. D. Cesnola was right here. He could see. But as you'll see, they didn't really pay much attention or pay much mind to that.
Yes. It was very interesting because you ended up with a situation kind of like Second Bull Run, except for like it That you had the Sixth Corps leaving their or what corps is that? I think it's Sixth Corps, right? Smith's Corps.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Smith is sixth.
yeah. You had Smith's Corps leaving his underbelly like really open to Magruder coming up on the south because he was hyper focused on hitting Jackson around Hopewell, while Hancock took his men and were pushing towards Landmark. Now, another thing that they didn't realize was Zook was coming up here because they were still planning on doing a withdrawal after this. But Zook ended up coming back down, and if this battle would have continued going on, you probably would have had Zook's division on the other side of the Little River being able to come down behind the Confederate lines. But that didn't end up panning out. You end up having Hancock trying to push Little River into a ton of artillery and not being able to cross there. And now Smith drawing up on the south side to face Colston Lawton's division and not paying too much attention to Magruder's entire corps down here for one reason or not. As well as the rest of Longstreet's corps was coming up from Warrington to go and support Magruder and Jackson up here. So they had two essentially like fresh divisions. These guys had not seen combat this entire game to come up and support them in this attack against the two Union corps. And over here in the east, finally, Rhodes and Longstreet get across Bull Run and set up defensive positions. And in the north, you can finally see the outcome of the Battle of Gum Springs, where Stuart sadly fell. Hampton takes command of the corps, and Rooney Lee, cousin to F. Lee, takes command of Hampton's division, and the Union cavalry is just scattered to the wind. Um, yeah, that is pretty much it with this one. We'll move forward a little bit more. We'll get into the Battle of Little River.
Final battle of the campaign.
Mm-hmm. This is where we decided to call it at. We'll explain why we called it here in just a second. But this is the battle that we finally decided, like, this is going to be the end of the campaign. There were some pretty major battles fought throughout this campaign. You had the Battle Aldie, Chantilly, Third Bull Run. Third Bull Run was a massive battle itself. Uh, in the last couple campaigns, we had one major battle decide the entire campaign. This one, there were multiple major battles going on throughout the campaign that really could have decided it, but we decided with the amount of forces on the board and that there was still enough that, you know, like each team could go and pull something off that we allowed them to keep going. But it was after this that we decided that we would that we would call it a game here. Also, Tabletop Simulator is taking a little bit.
When Ryan says these were massive forces, these two armies were actually the largest forces assembled on both sides so far in the war. There were high expectations. There were high expectations from both governments to deal a decisive blow to the opposing force. While Ryan, I think he crashed while he
I'm back.
loads back.
I'm back.
You're back?
Okay, you can probably rejoin.
Yeah, I shall.
Okay. So, as we can see, Magruder launched his men north. And you're not going to see the battle screenshots here. Sadly, how we usually do battles is that, you know, we do, like, the battle happens here, and then, like, during the battle they get drove back because it's 4-hour turns. They get drove back, but they met down here. Howe and Brooks' division slammed in to D.H. Hill and Colston's divisions around Hopewell, and actually broke D.H. Hill's division. He was suffering heavy straggling, low morale. They saw a lot of the fighting at Third Bull Run. They finally broke here in this battle. And Colston is also not faring too well here. However, as that was going on, Magruder orders a charge. And the corps surges forward, marches north, and they smash into the line. Nola was also down here trying to hold them off, and Nola got beat pretty badly by Magruder's corps. Um, they smashed into them, started pushing back north, and ended around here. In the north, Hancock decided to go and hold position, and I'm not really sure what the determination was made. They were planning on drawing north anyway, to relink up with the Army of Army of the Potomac, and this was kind of like their hope here, like smashing into the line to break them, and after this they would start to withdraw. Um, in the east, there was a little truce going on between both cavalry sides, as the Union just lost a entire division, and the Confederates were also like suffering really, really bad straggling here at the same time. They were pretty disorganized, especially with the death of Stuart. They needed time to reorganize, so there was a little truce here, and they brought the body of Kilpatrick back to the Union lines with a little ceremony.
One thing that was interesting about going into this battle up here, where Kilpatrick's second division was effectively wiped from the map, is that Stuart and his 2IC were in contention with each other. Kind of, I think, for the first time that I had personally seen from the campaign. They were usually simpatico. Stuart was like, "We gotta go. We gotta attack them. We're gonna break the entire division." His 2IC was like, "No, it's gonna be too costly. Our people are too worn out." Well, they ended up both being right.
It just ended with Stuart's death, which was highly expected throughout all the campaigns I've ran. Stuart has pulled off some crazy things where like I knew he was not going to make it out of it, and somehow he pulled through. Um, this was a crazy battle up here, and how that ended. And what's about to happen down here is honestly more insane, in my opinion. So finally, we get to the final turn of the game, and this is where it all came down to this. Just give it a second to load. Hopefully my tabletop doesn't crash again. Come on, tabletop simulator. We'll give it a moment, but Zuti brought this up earlier. We'll discuss this while we're waiting on this to finish loading. The expectations of each side coming into this battle, especially the battle over here, the Battle of Little River, with it being the largest battle during this campaign, each side, like the Union and the Confederacy, had this expectation of the generals that this is going to be a victory no matter what. For the Confederates, they had raised the largest army, like even historical, like the army of Northern Virginia at this point is absolutely massive. They've stripped garrisons from Virginia. They stripped garrisons from North Carolina. Like they pulled like troops out of forts and everything to go and try to make the Army of Northern Virginia as large as they could for this battle for Beauregard to be successful. They pulled cannons out of forts. They went and picked every horse they could across Virginia and North Carolina to go and make his cavalry corps as large as it is. They did everything to go and like make Beauregard successful here. And the same thing on the Army of the Potomac. Like at this point, across Virginia and across Pennsylvania and Maryland, you're going to struggle to find anyone that has a good-looking horse because they're all been pressed into military service. So the expectations were extremely high on what the armies were to achieve here, especially because this is not sustainable for the Confederacy. So Beauregard had to pull out a win here. He had to go and do something that would, like cripple the Army of Potomac. And this is what it came down to. Magruder, like from in the last hours of the day, did an attack north and absolutely smashed Smith's lines. This was some of the like most costly fighting that we've seen. And Jackson was just trying to keep his lines together. Hood came up and smashed to the Union flank as they were trying to withdraw, and the Union cavalry tried to go and flank around the side of the Confederates. However, what they didn't realize was, if you noticed last time, French was coming up the rear, and French was doing the exact same thing to come up the side. And you had this moment where French's division smashed headlong into De Cesnola's division. And De Cesnola's division had been fighting for a couple days at this point. They took heavy casualties fighting early in Heath, and now they ran into an entire Confederate division again. They were broken and had to retreat. Smith was trying to withdraw and ended up being attacked by an entire corps. They were pushed back, and Hancock at this point has started his withdrawal, expecting Smith to follow. So at this point, Magruder's men are tired and exhausted. Jackson's corps is struggling to even stay a military formation at this point after days and days of fighting, low on supply.
Fighting in all three major battles.
Yeah, low on
Third
supply,
Bull Run,
low on
Upperville,
morale.
and Little River.
They have sustained heavy casualties. A.P. Hill's division now under Rhodes has taken heavy casualties. Longstreet doesn't even have his full corps together. They've just been tasked out over here and has been marching all over. They did within a week or two marched up from Petersburg. The Confederates are exhausted at this point, and we look at what was accomplished. They have Northern Virginia, which they controlled this area last campaign. They don't have the Valley anymore after they deleted half their supplies at Winchester. They've taken heavy casualties that cannot be replaced. And at this point, none of the formations are ready to fight on. Magruder is probably in the best of shape. Well, Longstreet, I guess Longstreet is too, but he's like scattered over here. So
Magruder had also taken a couple of his divisions are good, but a couple of his divisions took huge casualties because they pressed into Smith at bayonet, and Smith's units were they were outnumbered considerably, but they were veteran and they were fresh, and so they took heavy losses pushing back Smith.
Yes. So at this point, just like no Confederate formation is able to do another attack, which is what Beauregard's plan was now that he's pushed these guys off the field to sweep back east. However, we made the decision call here because Beauregard is soon going to learn the actual condition that his army is in, which is Jackson is about to fall apart. Magruder has sustained heavy casualties. Rhodes' corps is also not faring well. Stuart is dead, and his cavalry has been run into the ground. At this point, the Confederates, the best they can hope is to try to set into a defensive position. So we've decided that this is where the campaign will be called. For the Union, their overall objectives, too, have not been accomplished. They were going to drive south and, defeat the Confederate Army, go and try to push them back across the Rappahannock. And at this point, the Army of Northern Virginia got within 7 miles of D.C. It's not a very good look for the Army of the Potomac. The only saving grace for their CIC is that he was put in a very bad situation and was able to reconsolidate the army and get into a way better position. So, a lot of kudos to Sedgwick for that. But, because honestly, I do not envy this situation Sedgwick was put into. He was getting demands from the War Department immediately on what needed to be done, and had a scattered army to reorganize, and he did that. So both sides, however, at the end of this, did not reach any of their strategic objectives. The Union at the end of this is probably better off positioned than the Confederates, but they've essentially lost every battle they went into. They did accomplish a huge goal, though, of killing Stuart. Stuart was immensely popular across the South at this time. His exploits through Maryland and then through the last campaign. Stuart is a major historical figure, and he's probably going to be looked at like Jackson was at the end of, actually about the same time as this, at Chancellorsville, where like everyone is like, oh well, what if Jackson survived? What if Jackson kept fighting? Well, Stuart is probably going to be in that situation of like, what if Stuart survived? What if Stuart led another cavalry raid into the north and absolutely destroyed the Union Army and burned down New York? Crazy things like that. But but we decided that really either side at this point is like the Union is still holding position because of what they believe is the entire Army of Northern Virginia down here, and the Army of Northern Virginia is not in any place to keep attacking. So this is where we decided to finally call the campaign here. So there is a couple things that I would like to address, some issues that came up with the campaign, which the major one, actually before I do that, Azunti, is there anything that I missed, like at the ending positions or last battle or anything like that you'd like to add on before we kind of go on to reflections and our thoughts on the campaign?
No, I'm excited to continue.
All right. So some reflections on the campaign and what could have gone better. The biggest issue that I ran into was supply. The supply was really, really great on paper. We did a lot of math to go make it work out and like try to make it realistic, but it was a lot to manage. And to be honest, if we were to do it again for the system to work, for the supply system to work, it would be very, very laborious. You'd almost need to go into like each one of these wagons and manually update it as supply was used for every single wagon token and every single token on a map to track their supply. Which we had one umpire to do all the supply, and he used the spreadsheet, and it didn't end up lining up well with what was actually being used. And it was annoying for players. It was annoying for umpires. It just wasn't that great a system. We're going to need to go back and tweak it some more. The second thing to add to that, we had quartermaster players. We had Ingalls in Washington, and the Confederate quartermaster ended up coming up to Warrenton to keep supply pushing. But having it be one player, I feel like those players got very burnt out very quickly, as there wasn't much for them to do other than spreadsheet simulator. And even then, like a lot of times they just be sitting around waiting on turns and turns and turns to do anything. So that was probably the worst part of the campaign was supply. I will say it did have its intended effect though.
Yeah.
We had Beauregard from last game and other players from last game that went headlong charging into each other, not worrying about their supply lines because like, oh, we'd be able to keep pushing. Like we just go and drop a depot every 20 miles and we're good. And this flipped it on its head. The Confederates were much less aggressive than last campaign. If without the supply system, I'm sure the Confederates would have just launched headlong north, not worrying about supply. But because they had to go and worry about supply and wagons, it did constrain the armies to move, I feel like, more naturally and actually have to go and worry about how they were going to get supplied instead of just, full on like launching a charge in any direction to go and just take land. So it does need to be tweaked. I feel like it had its intended effects, but it needs to be better implemented into the game. Some other reflections that I had on like what could go better. Obviously, like a big pain for the Union was the turnover of commanders. Now, the commanders dying, that's fine as part of the game. We had quite a few commanders die. We come over here and look at all the different commander tokens we now have laying over here. It's quite a bit. Players came and went. And the death and wounding of commanders, that's part of the game. But the commanders leaving mid-game and us scrambling to go and fill that position, it was a lot. And I feel bad for Sedgwick being cast into that position. There were some other players brought in, and they did fairly well. Burns and Bernie and Poe, where is he? He's somewhere around here. Right? No, Poe was division commander. So Burns and Bernie, they did incredibly well for like just getting shoved into the seat and being like, okay, here you go. Same thing with Rhodes being just shoved into his seat and just like, here you go, figure it out. They did really, really well with that. Other than that, I feel like the campaign went really well. It was not what I was expecting. At the beginning of the game, me and the other umpires were talking about like what do we expect is going to happen, and I think this went beyond all of our expectations. I was not expecting this game to last this long. I was not expecting it to be this like to be where we're sitting at now. I expected it to be one large major battle, and someone was going to win or lose it, and then be driven back, and like that was going to be the game. Instead, this turned into multiple like medium to large sized battles that each army was able to continue fighting afterwards, which which was impressive on its own. The players, you guys did really, really good. I was really impressed with how you guys handled it, and the fact that you guys stayed engaged during the whole thing. Um, Azunti, what are your thoughts of the game? Like, what could have gone better? What was amazing? Anything like that?
I think the first thing I want to shout out is the two ICs across both sides. Um, I'm not very good at picking an MVP, so I'm not going to. But across both sides, um, the two ICs at large were some of the best players that I saw. And some of them got to fill command roles, some of them got to do other things by transferring themselves between commands. But in general, I was really pleased with the two ICs, and I wanted to give a shout out to every two IC in this game. You guys did fantastic. It was really cool seeing how involved some of you were too.
That was.
Um,
Oh yeah, my bad.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, just add on what you said. Yeah, no, it was amazing. There was, I want to say, like, only one or two players like ever missed a deadline, because the two ICs were so active in making
Mhm.
sure that, like, oh no, deadline's coming. My commander hadn't went, and like my commander hadn't submitted orders. I need to get on top of it, and we didn't have to remind too much because you guys were just always on top of your game. So that was really really awesome to go and see. And I appreciate all you guys for that, because you guys, a lot of my games, past games, I've seen two ICs just completely fall inactive, and then like we're scrambling to go and find people to like get their orders in. So big kudos to all you guys. Um, is there anything else you want to add? My bad for cutting you off.
Oh, no worries. I'm glad that you had that additional thing to add. Um, I think that one of the most fascinating parts of the way this played out is consistent with Kriegspiel. Pretty much every issue that happened on both sides was a lack of communication. The Union command, obviously, I'm more in tune with, in particular, had a lot of issues because of the command style chosen. It was a great idea on paper. With this hierarchical system, the wing commander or the individual corps commanders would report to the wing commanders. The wing commanders would report to Couch, and from there, Couch could make decisions. But what ended up happening is that the wing commanders lacked information because of the way the Confederate cavalry was so far in advance of their infantry, which led to Couch being fairly passive and not involved, and then the division or the corps commanders taking up their own initiatives, which is even outside of Hooker, led to a lot of both good things and bad things that happened. So it was really fascinating just seeing how the command structure itself dictated how things progressed. The same is with the Confederates had a similar issue where Beauregard made a lot of decisions based off not knowing where Magruder was or what his situation was. And he was kind of overcompensating for it, which is what led to Hill being isolated. And it also what led to Jackson being on this side and being taking part in those battles. So I thought it was really fascinating just seeing not just how the communication, but also how the command structure itself led to different decisions that are being made during this campaign.
All right. And just I want to add, like, my favorite thing for this campaign was one of Azunti's reports. Like, I just want to say the story because it's hilarious. One of his reports to Bernie, I believe it was of Sickles' severed leg coming to him in a dream and demanding he attack. I just want to point that out. It was absolutely hilarious. I absolutely loved Azunti's reports. Azunti and Squire were amazing umpires to go and have during this. They did a lot of work to go and make this campaign possible. I was extremely busy for a lot of it, so You can thank them for keeping reports on time and like being really, really great and fun with the reports. Some of the best reports I've ever seen were written by them. So really great. Like they did some really great work. Lego, he was on top of all the dispatches. Like the system that he made to make sure that dispatches were getting sent, if they were intercepted, tracking them across the map. Lego did an amazing job of that, and also Slock tracking supply. That was a thankless job. That is the one job he had. He never wrote reports. It was just supply. And the supply system had a myriad of problems with it, and he took it on the chin and just ran with it and made it work. So really great shout out to him. Ash, he was here at the beginning of the campaign before he had to go on travels, and the last campaign was a lot of work for him, a lot of work for me. So so that he even showed up to help out with this one was amazing, and it was great help for us. Overall, my overall feeling on how this campaign went. It really went past all my expectations on like where I even started with this. I started the Maryland campaign with no knowledge of how to do on to Richmond. I figured it out as I went and did it completely by myself, which was miserable. The Fredericksburg campaign, it was just me and Ash running it with a ridiculous amount of reports and players in it. In this campaign, I had a lot of great help from the other umpires, and it had got a lot larger than the last couple of campaigns. There was, I think we did count, there's like 20-something players involved in this. So it was a massive campaign, and with how this all ran, I'm incredibly impressed that we were able to keep it, somewhat historically grounded, if not historically accurate. It's historically grounded. That we haven't diverged away from reality on how this would actually play out, So I'm really happy with how this campaign went. Azunti, if you don't have anything to add, I'm going to move into Q&A with the CICs. So I'll have Sedgwick, you'll be Union CIC, as well as, and Pendleton, you'll go and step in as the role of Confederate if there's any questions that you guys have. While they are doing this, if any of the players, you guys have any questions, like a little Q&A session right now, if you guys want to put your questions in the Hangout chat, and we can go get through to answering them.
Ryan, you shouted all us out, so you deserve a shout out too. I mean, this game wouldn't exist without you. Even from an individual standpoint, this is my first time doing a big umpiring of a play-by-play, and early on, the first few turns, you really helped me understand what a good report looks like, and basically how to conduct myself as an umpire, and that was really formative for me. I feel like I'm a lot stronger of an umpire as a result of you, and I don't think, we probably would have been a lot more disjointed without your leadership. So I wanted to shout you out too. So thank you for running a game and running the series. It's been a privilege, honestly, to be a part of it.
Yeah, I'd like to just reflect that as well. This was a phenomenal game, just really enjoyable and well executed. Ryan, you've organized an amazing campaign here that's been very continuous, and I don't really see that too much in Kriegsspiel. Just campaign after campaign that is based on the previous one. So that's just pretty awesome, generally speaking. And of course, a big thanks to all of the umpires for putting this together and allowing us to, as players, enjoy it. You guys are the ones doing the hard work, and we're the ones having all the fun. So just really, really big. I'm sure all of us, are really appreciative to you guys, and want you to know that we're grateful to you for doing this, especially for so long, for how long this game has gone. Thank you so much.
All right, and then Pendleton, if there's anything you want to add before we open up a Q&A to everyone, like I said, if you guys have any questions, any comments, or anything you want to bring up, just put it in the chat and we'll get to it. But Pendleton, anything?
If I could ever find my mute button. No, great job. Great opponents. Congratulations to the Union Army for pulling off a victory. I don't know how in the hell you did it, but you did it through the grit and persistence.
It's more of a draw,
Also,
I feel.
it definitely sounded like a draw after this AAR, but I do want to thank the other Confederate players. There were arguments and bickerings, but everybody was respectful. Everybody played as a team, and that's what you want to see when it comes to any type of operational front. You want people working with synergy. So, Stuart, congratulations on becoming a legend. You definitely won some victories there and definitely assisted in some of the bigger battles. I don't think we would have had as big a victory without the assistance of the cavalry in them, especially with Third Bull Run. I think that was the best showcase of combined arms I think I've seen in a IKS, which is wonderful. But yes, thank you to the Confederate team, the umpire team, as well as our worthy opponents, the Yankees.
All right. Yeah. No. Real quick. Final shout outs. Jamie, you've been amazing as Stuart. So like honestly, it's gonna be sad not seeing your presence in the next series. As Stuart, it's gonna be sad. You're gonna be truly missed on the Confederate team. And then Hooker, like you got taken out really, really early on in this campaign, and you still stayed active. You still stayed, engaged throughout the entire game when it turned from a Kriegspiel into a little political simulator for you. So like, thank you so much for not getting overwhelmed or bogged down with any of that, and like just moving forward with it. Having you as part of the game and like contributed greatly to keeping everything more realistic. I feel like that was a lot of fun. I know Azuti had a lot of fun with your reports. Us like myself and Squire kept looking at that and what was going to happen out of it, and it was amazing. Um, I'm not seeing. I'm going to give like one more minute if anyone's typing up some questions or anything before I move on to bring an end to this AAR.
I definitely agree that the Confederate cavalry was phenomenal. I think historically the Confederate cavalry just has just reputation and ability to just do impossible feats, and that certainly has been reflected in this game and the last few games, where we just are just reacting to them, just dealing with them, being like, what are they doing? Why are they here? How can we stop them? We can't stop them. And it's the Confederacy does start and continue to have this advantage with horses, and it just doesn't end. It just doesn't end, and it's been well utilized this game. So I do agree with what Ryan said.
All right, and thank you. Rooney Lee is asking, do you have any idea how we're going to update the supply rules and how it will be for players? We've been discussing this a lot on how we could change supply rules to be better. First thing that I would want to change is not making it a single player for the quartermaster. This was a very miserable role for them to be in. And furthermore, like moving forward, I think it's going to be more abstracted on the supplies. So there's not like where's a massive wagon train? Like these massive wagon trains, like they stretch on for miles and miles and miles, and that might be realistic, but it's just like I think we're gonna abstract supply a little bit more so that you can't do what was happening in last campaigns where people just slingshot themselves into the enemy rear and not have any worry about supply because they're supplied within a 20-mile radius of a depot. So we're probably gonna change it to be more abstracted to like um, general supply points when it comes down to down supply and less wagons on the map. To like wagons still have to be brought with you. You have to have them there. They can get destroyed. You'll have to like resupply somehow. But we're still working on that. I will update the rules in the future to like reflect any changes to the supply system that we make. So just keep an eye on that. It's in the IKS rule sets. If you go to the channel there is a pinned comment with a whole spreadsheet of different IKS rule sheets. It is Battlecry Freedom Edition. It's just a change of Chief's rules. We made some pretty heavy modifications to it. So if you guys want to take a look at that, it's there. I can also post them in here if you guys want a copy of the rule set that we used. Then let's see, any other questions? All right, yeah.
With
So that looks to be it. Oh, Cedric, you have something?
Were the umpires ever concerned that the battle could continue in the south of the Shenandoah, southern Shenandoah Valley, off the map? If that ever the case?
We had a few players that wanted to move off map. It didn't. It wasn't really feasible, so it didn't unfortunately really come up. But I think the map has expanded out that way, or will be soon anyway. So
It has. So another person I need to shout out real quick, Nomad. Nomad is the guy who's made all these maps. There's a whole channel dedicated to it on IKS. But let me pull it up because he's added a lot more to the map since then. We just haven't imported the maps into the game yet. But he has added further into the valley so that you guys can go on your crazy valley campaigns even more. And he's currently working on adding in this area of the map over here, which would be what's the name of it? It's where the it's where they surrendered at. General Lee did.
Appomattox.
Appomattox courthouse area is going to be added in over here eventually, and he's working on finishing the maps over here. But it's like goes all the way down to pretty much Norfolk. So he's done a great work on getting all these maps done. Wouldn't be able to do any of the campaigns without these maps. They're phenomenal. So let's real quick shout out to him. But my concern was that like everyone is going to go into the valley, which for consistently 3 games, I don't know what it is with my player group here that everyone looks at this and like, yes, this is where the war will be decided in this little 26 by 40 mile area. Everyone is just like drawn to this for some reason. I don't quite understand it. Historically, like there were some battles in here, like you had the Valley campaign, but majority of the battles were focused around like Northern Virginia itself. So I don't know what the fascination is with coming to the Valley, but you know, there's now more Valley for you guys to run amok through.
We have more questions coming in. Rooney Lee asks, with the situation of all cavalry, both Confederate and Federal, are the probability of corps divisions have lower numbers of cavalry, or is there a possibility to have the same numbers as this campaign?
Ooh, so that is a big thing. So a lot of the cavalry has been pulled from the valley, like literally just going to people, and what was pretty common at this time was essentially giving them like IOUs. Just going up to people and being like, we're taking your horse. Here's this like IOU where maybe you'll get money from the government in the future. So a lot of Northern Virginia, Virginia itself, Pennsylvania, Maryland has just been stripped of horses because the Union kept losing horses left and right throughout the first couple campaigns, and this campaign not like being any different than that. And the Confederates expanding their cavalry corps so gigantically. The replacement of horse flesh is going to be a major concern moving forward for kind of all sides. And that's not a secret to anyone. The Union knew this. The Confederacy knows this. That like there's no horses anywhere at this point. Trying to get more horses is going to be a big issue. Like not even bringing up the fact of getting people who are comfortable on horses and riding horses. The actual riders is going to be a big issue as well. You don't get a trained cavalryman overnight. How close were you to being dead in Arcola? Zunti, you want to answer that one for Averil?
Yeah, I think we rolled for you and Kilpatrick, and we it was like a narrow miss, if I remember right. So you both survived, but it was pretty close.
Then were there any close calls that could have changed the game drastically? I would have yes. So Howard had this little fever dream where he was like, I had a dream the Confederates are to the east, we must march east. And they were going to march directly east over here. And if Hooker and Howard would have did that, they would have like been able to march essentially around the Confederate army and absolutely just hit their flank, or like ran into AP Hill or Longstreet where they wouldn't expect it. Instead, Reynolds arrested him at Groveton, and the corps stayed here where they were demolished. Another close call was when you guys are all marching back to Washington because Reynolds was like, "Screw this, let's everyone run back there now." Um, the Confederates, all they had to do was just march north and hit your column because you guys weren't in any like good defensive position. You would have had your backs to Potomac. If they would have just attacked you there, that probably would have been game over really quickly. Uh, Also, if you guys would have stayed in the valley, on the Confederate side, I mean, if they didn't station half their supplies in the valley, they would have been much better supplied throughout the campaign and would have been able to be more aggressive and push harder. I honestly feel like if they would have pushed DC when they had the chance, they could have had a victory on the fact that they captured the hills overlooking Washington and could shell the city. Now, actually taking Washington itself is a completely different story. You know, they'd have to go and take one of the fords and march to the north side of the river because, like, trying to cross Long Bridge or Chain Bridge or anything like this around here would be pretty brutal. But if they were able to cross the river and get to the north and take the city, which I feel like that'd be pretty unlikely for them to do. But just if they were able to get on the heights and shell the city, like how much pandemonium that would have caused across the north and the sheer morale damage that would have like sustained, it would have been major. I mean, Washington would have to be evacuated. Congress would have to leave. They were in session at this point. The president would have to leave. War Department would have to leave. That would have been a enormous like defeat at that point. Like you guys would still be on the field. You guys would be able to continue operations, but it would just be so terrible for Lincoln, especially because I believe he's coming up on they're coming up on their midterms here, so it'd be pretty bad for them. In addition, second question: how bad is the horse population in American territory? Yeah,
Really quick before we move on, Ryan, I have one more that I want to add.
yes.
Close calls. There was a moment where Meade and Smith were right here on the Blue Ridge, right as Magruder was falling back, and they both wanted to go here, and they didn't have any orders from Reynolds to do anything, and they did both eventually decide to do there. If they had left even a few turns earlier, they would have gotten in front of Magruder, and Magruder's second corps would have been completely surrounded with Hancock coming in from behind too. So that would have been an entire quarter of the rebel army completely isolated and effectively wiped out. But they were waiting on orders from high, and they never actually made an advance, and they couldn't actually see the army well enough to know that it was the enemy because they were wearing blue uniforms.
Oh yeah, they
So
thought it
that
was
was
Hancock.
So that could have been a big what if too, is if any of those differences had been different.
And then the effect on the horse population across North America. Honestly, it's pretty bad. Out west is much sparsely populated, so like the amount of horses out there is also pretty low. Um, so the horse population in North America is pretty devastated. It's probably going to have to see like imports of horses being brought in to go and sustain armies. Just because like at least at this regional level, they've taken every horse they could grab to go and like press into service in the army. Um,
Historically, 1.5 million horses died during the American Civil War, by the way.
Next question is, sorry, I gotta get back up to the channel. Will you be expanding an umpire team next campaign? Well, we're gonna see on who we get to return. If I'm able to get Lego and Slock and Ash back in here, I'm sure Azunti and Squire will join me again on next campaign. We are moving on to different projects though. So I am moving on to my like basically like expanded pig war scenario, and Zunti and Squire have their own scenario that they're coming up with. Highly suggest that you guys join their game whenever they start it. I got a little sneak peek on it, and it looks like it's going to be fantastic. Um, so potentially bring in new umpires. We'll see who's able to join. I have historically had a uh, been bad at getting umpires to stick around. I don't know why. Like my first campaign with the Maryland campaign, I started with like 4 umpires. I did one resolution. I had multiple people helping me. The very next resolution, it was just me, and it stayed like that for the rest of the campaign res. So we'll see. The problem is that I do resolutions like at one time every single time, and it just like if people aren't able to make that time frame to be able to show up for res, it's just not going to work. Luckily, Zunti and Squire, like we all had pretty like compatible schedules to be able to meet. But even then, like we'd be doing resolutions for like 4 or 5 hours. So like it's kind of demanding, and like any umpire that does join has to know that and like know what they're signing up for.
I think if we're going to do a game as large as this one, we're going to need a larger umpire team than we even had. So if anybody is interested in making that transition, please join us. We're more than happy to have you.
If the original plans for both teams had been more fully implemented, which team do you expect would have won the campaign? That's a hard one.
I think it's impossible to say personally.
Yeah, it would really come down to kind of luck. If Reynolds' wing would have stayed together and just marched down towards Warrenton, they would have ran into Jackson's single corps and would have probably driven him back across the Rappahannock, at least to Culpeper before the rest of the Army Northern Virginia arrived, kind of isolating Magruder up here by himself. So you'd have the interesting scenario of you have the Union Army probably set up along the Rappahannock like this, with the Confederate Army opposing them, but then Magruder now coming down behind them, unless he got caught up fighting Hancock. So there's a lot of what ifs with that. Initially, I would probably see more Union success, but towards the end, like with how crazy these campaigns have been, like I don't know if the Confederates would have launched a counterattack around towards Fredericksburg, or like what you guys would have planned out, because both plans are very vague on march south and fight, march north and fight. So it really could have gone any way. This wasn't the way I expected it to go, I'll say that, but it could have gone any way. Let's see. Who's leading the Army of Northern Virginia? I will keep that a secret for now. It's going to be you guys are going to be kind of surprised by that one.
We do know.
We do know. We do know exactly who it's going to be. Let's see. When will we march on to Richmond? I hope next campaign you guys march on to Richmond. I think that's all the questions. I'll hold out a little bit. Stuart is not leading the Army of Northern Virginia. That is the answer to that. Who's not leading it? Okay, I think that's all the questions. We just had Squire join. Squire, you missed most of it. However, I would like your feedback on one thing. Just umpire reflections. What could have gone better? What was amazing? Do you have any funny stories? Or like, what was your overall feeling of the campaign?
Sorry I'm late, gentlemen. I'm completely overslept for reasons entirely unknown to me. I slept through 2 alarms. I'm very, very sorry. I had a great deal of fun umpiring this campaign. I hope everyone else had a good time playing in it. I think as an umpire, the one thing that could have gone better or made the campaign drag more than it should have was, I think I was a little bit overambitious in writing up the reports the way I did. They were. I think Umpire Ryan put in a lot of effort to try to make the resolutions and the reports out to the players as immersive as possible, as detailed as possible, as flavorful as possible. But doing that in the sort of traditional third-party or third-person sort of narrative concept meant that we were sort of writing multiple mini novels each turn. Which was a lot of work. A labor of love, definitely, but a lot of work. And so one of the things I've been thinking about is ways to keep that immersiveness for the players and keep keep the interest factor high. So when you get your report, you're still excited to read it, but do it in a way that is quicker and easier for the umpires without us having to, you know, uh, without us having to do quite as much heavy lifting each turn, so we can get turns possibly resolved faster, more interestingly, or at least as interestingly, but keep the game moving more quickly. Additionally, I was one of the people that helped write the supply rules mechanically, and I'm sure there's been a lot of talk about that. The intent was, of course, to try to make the supply issues felt by the armies in real life as biting as possible to the players, and to try to prevent just sort of like gamified tactics and give you guys some real complications to deal with. And that certainly worked, but it worked almost too well. And I think there's going to have to be some rethink of that as well. Otherwise, I had a great time umpiring. I mostly dealt with the Confederate players, and I didn't really deal as much with the Union players. But the players I was umpiring for, I think did fantastically. I had a great time umpiring with all of you, and yeah, on to the next one.
Awesome. Thank you, Squire. And well, I already said this earlier, but want you to hear it. Thank you so much for umpiring this campaign. Your reports were amazing, especially your red shirt report for AP Hill is fantastic. So thank you all for being here. That's gonna conclude the AAR. If you guys want to stay back, talk about it, anything, once I'm done here, you guys can feel free. But that is going to conclude the AAR.